what does it mean for tourism? So IAG is down today. Does it mean that actually we'll have routes stricken off, or is there a way that people still fly but just through different places?
Of course, the North Atlantic is a very important market to a number of airline groups, not least IAG, and particularly within IAG, British Airways and Aer Lingus are especially exposed to North Atlantic travel. The same applies to Air France, KLM here in Europe, and Lufthansa. And then on the US side, we have American, Delta, and United as well. Now, the reality is we're just coming towards the end of the peak summer season on both sides of the market, particularly Americans. Once Labor Day comes, it's all over bar the shouting. Even in the UK, with schools going back, we're past the peak. So a lot of that time has been lost. The fact that Europe, in the EU sense, did open up for a number of months, and then the UK a little bit later, gave the airlines some benefit. We've seen some airlines seeing massive spikes in bookings in recent weeks when those extra freedoms were allowed for US double vaccinated travelers to come here. But that's a smaller part of the market relative to the demand from Europe to the US. So there still hasn't been anything like a normal summer season for any airlines.
Well, John, I was
just going to say the impact. The impact's much greater for European carriers. It accounts for a bigger share of their revenue than it does for the US carriers, because the US carriers have the benefit of their domestic markets.
So let's stay with Europe for a second. So what the conversation was in the spring was that summer's got to be the season. If we don't get a proper summer season, it's all over. Now I feel like the conversation's like winter's going to be huge. If we don't get a proper winter season, it's going to be over. What does winter look like, and when and which ones have a cash pile to kind of get them through?
Well, winter normally would be a challenging season with or without COVID, and this is going to be the second winter since we've been dealing with this virus. We've had 2 summers lacking the normal kind of revenues that airlines would earn from these markets. So your point is well made, that it's all about liquidity and cash balances. Now, all of these big groups, the ones that I mentioned, 3 big network carriers in the US and those in Europe, do have substantial cash balances, either through having gone out and done equity raises or turned to bond issues, or in the case of 2 of the European routes, 2 of the European groups, Lufthansa and Air France KLM, they've had substantial cash injections from their governments as well. So cash is there, but of course airlines are expensive in burning through cash, even when they're not flying. Costs can be still around about 50% for an airline that is in hibernation mode compared to when it is flying. And the other challenge is, as they try to marginally put more capacity on, which they have been doing recently, their cash running costs are going up anyway. So although these groups are big, it at the very least is going to stack up more debt for the future. I mean, Lufthansa, for example, is looking to pay off some of the government investment made. It's already done a bit of it already, but this doesn't help for the future in debt piles running several years into the future. Small airlines, different story. Maybe they don't make it.
Okay, who doesn't make it, John? So from what I understand, if we're going to have restrictions or not restrictions, the way we travel and actually go on holiday will change. So maybe we take 1 trip instead of 3 trips, but we go for longer. So if you're a hotel, you don't suffer so much, but actually airlines will. So who survives this?
Well, again, the big, strong players, we've talked there about the network groups. I would expect them to survive, but they may survive in a smaller form. We've seen very little attrition so far. You could argue part of that is because we'd had it already, even pre-COVID, with some long-haul airlines disappearing. We saw Norwegian coming out of the North Atlantic market completely. They have survived as a business, but now only as a fraction of the size they were before. They had approaching 200 aircraft. They were operating long-haul. Now they're flying about 50 aircraft, mainly within Norway. We have airlines who are not in the North Atlantic market, but who rely on those regular journeys that you described for short holiday breaks, such as Ryanair and EasyJet and Wizz. They, again, are the leaders in Europe with big cash piles. But if we travel less often, then, of course, that repeat business is a challenge, as is the mix of travel. There's the question about when, or indeed if, how much business travel in the premium cabins, the business class cabins, actually comes back for the future, because companies are reining in their budgets. They're showing also that they're environmentally conscious by not traveling, and they're doing the Zoom and Teams and so on, online conferences. So a lot of challenges out there for all the groups.
So it seems like, though, the popular guys, and you were just mentioning some of them, the budget airlines that are short-haul travel, is that kind of positivity baked into these guys already?
I think it is. I mean, they're going out very ambitiously, expanding. Ryanair and Wizz Air, in particular, are growing their fleets. Wizz, I think, has added more routes than any of these airlines in recent times. They've done it in a judicious and prudent way. They've maybe trimmed capacity from some areas, taken aircraft out of certain airports and put them elsewhere. They've made diversity a strength by doing a lot of tests perhaps which they wouldn't have done pre-COVID, so that they're exposing themselves to many more markets and many more traffic flows, so they increase the chances that some will work for the long term, even if others fall by the wayside. I touched on some small carriers. The challenge we have, particularly in Europe, is there are a number of small European carriers who have survived because, again, governments have put money in. Alitalia, although it's going to change in name, it looks like Alitalia, an airline which ordinarily would not survive in market terms, is going to be there in some form, some sort of new iteration, because the Italian government's backing it up, maybe under a different name, but it's still going to be around.